Hello, everybody, and welcome to this second edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook, brought to you by SDPN. Hello, Arpin.
Marc-Antoine, how's it going?
I'm great, man.
Episode 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, we officially we have a library now. We have a library of podcast episodes with this new podcast. But, the Canadian season is underway. Just got back, not just yesterday, but just got back from Toronto.
Yeah.
What did you think?
What did you think? Let's start with that.
I think we should. What I thought is that we learned a lot about this team, and that I think there's actually a lot of stuff. You don't want to make too much of the first game, but there are certain decisions that were taken, certain ways that the team played, and certain things that Marty St. Louis did that I think were a little telling for what he plans on doing or how he plans on running things this season. So yeah, I think without making too much of one game, we should look into some of those things and see what was telling and what was just a one-off for that game. My first thing was that Nick Suzuki killed a lot of penalties.
He did.
And that's one of the only definitive answers we got out of Martin during training camp, was that he was hoping to have Nick Suzuki kill less penalties.
Kill less.
And the other thing was he did seem to kind of give the impression, or maybe I interpreted it that way and I was wrong, that he was going to try and lessen Suzuki's load in terms of matchups and have Kirby Dach take on some of those tough matchups. That also turned out to be not true. I don't think, but I don't know if both of those things are not the plan. They just didn't happen to manifest themselves on night one, which was, I think, a uniquely difficult situation in terms of the firepower the Leafs have at the top of the lineup and the firepower they have on the power play.
Yeah.
That maybe he's going to slowly work that in. But, that's why I asked Marty after the game, were there any occasions where you were trying to get Nick away from that line? Because there were a couple of occasions where Nick wound up on the ice with against the fourth line, and I thought, oh, that's pretty crafty. But you look at the end of the game, and by far his most frequent opponent was Austin Matthews, and his answer was no. Marty wasn't all that impressed with me in Toronto, I gotta say. He didn't like
your line of questioning too much.
He didn't like my line of questioning before or after the game.
Right. But I think that with Suzuki, it was just before they start changing everything all at once, it's about easing everybody into the season, going to their known quantities. And Suzuki is definitely a known quantity. He finished, playing close to 22 minutes. I thought he had an amazing start. Him and Cole together before Suzuki got his penalty, and just that, like, the rest of the team got into a bit of he had a dip in his game like everybody else in the second period. But I thought he had a tremendous start at the face-off circle, was dominant, faced tough competition, and it's going to be. I think it's going to be a process when it comes to managing his ice time. Same goes for Mike Matheson. Mike Matheson, he played a ton. He played close to 27 minutes. If I'm not
both
mistaken,
special teams.
Yeah. And it's not as if the Canadians didn't have other options on the PK. Jordan Harris didn't play single second on the PK. Jack Guy did not play on the PK either. Kovacevic barely. So they had their guys. They went to their trusted guys a whole lot, especially after the first period, when everything seems very balanced. On the back end, because of Jack Guy's 17 minutes. Being out of the game that for so long, it skewed the things a little bit when it comes to ice time. But up front, it was very well balanced. But obviously, when the game was on the line, it was a different story. So, yeah, in terms of player usage, I wouldn't see too much into this, personally.
No, but I do think it's interesting that I think also the fact that the Kirby Dach line was doing so well against the Tavares line. Why would you change that? And so So, and we're going to talk about the dock line, obviously, because that was the biggest revelation, I guess, of the game and could have the most far-reaching implications. But I think you're right to bring up Matheson. I had a few of the Toronto media who I think for the first time realized what Mike Matheson could do. Like they were like, who is this guy? This is not the Mike Matheson I remember.
Yeah.
And it's an encouraging sign for the Canadians. I think most Canadians fans know that he has that in him because of how he finished the season last year, but he really has an opportunity to open some eyes. I mean, I had someone come up to me and be like, he looks like a number one defenseman. He did tonight at least.
Yeah.
And he did play a relatively mistake-free game, despite all those minutes, despite some of the situations he was put in. But he has, I think, an opportunity, if this is going to be how it is, to really take a step in terms of his league-wide reputation and really become that horse for the Canadians. He's not a number one defenseman. He's not a number one defenseman on a really strong team, but he can play the role of number one defenseman quite effectively. He can chew up those minutes. And it was actually interesting after the game. He's usually a guy who has a good big picture perspective on things. He's pretty cerebral in that way and can kind of see the positives out of a negative, and them blowing that game really bothered him. He did not like that. Just the way they went about it, them putting the Leafs on the power play so frequently, with these offensive zone penalties, failing to clear the zone, like all these little things that are very correctable. To have those things cost them the game did not sit well with him, and I think it's because of the quality of his own play is part of it, and to see how many things went right for the Canadians at various points in that game. But I think that's another sign of how the players are looking at this in a competitive way, which is normal.
But I wonder, when it comes to Matheson, I mean, yeah. So I refer to the fact that Jack Guy was out for 17 minutes, and he said it's funny because when we spoke to him on Thursday, Jack Guy said, "Oh, I had a few 17 minutes in juniors." He's quick to add up 10 plus 5 plus 2.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah.
I was
when
actually
it comes
wondering.
to instigators, yeah.
So I had one thought actually I was wondering if anyone ever been called for instigating a fight with Ryan Reeves.
Oof. Okay.
Has anyone ever been so hell-bent on fighting Ryan Reeves that the referee decided to give them the instigator and not Ryan Reeves? That might be a first. I don't know how to look that up. I wish I knew. I don't think you can. But I would venture to guess that over the last, let's say, 5 years, that's never happened.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It probably happened early in Reeves' career when he was, he didn't have the reputation that he's got today, where basically nobody hardly touches him or provokes him. Nobody pokes the bear except Arbor Jackeye. So,
apparently, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, and I think that's great for the Canadians to have a guy who sends that sort of message to the rest of the league, saying, you know what, even if it's Ryan Reeves, I won't think twice, and I'm gonna jump on the guy. We know by now that Jackeye is not an enforcer, but he sure won't get intimidated, and he's more than willing to drop the gloves. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's a tremendous asset for the Canadians, because you look around the league and guys who fight but can really play are fewer and fewer. So it's really he's borderline one of a kind right now.
Yeah, and the other thing about that, it wasn't much of a fight. I think everyone can, a few punches were thrown, but for someone to push Ryan Reeves from the end boards to the net and then topple the net over, that takes an incredible amount of strength. I was actually doing my live room, my athletic live room, between 4 and 4:45 at Scotiabank Arena. And the quietest part I could find was kind of the hallway that leads up to the Leafs dressing room. So that's right around the time the players arrive. And it's the thing in Toronto that, most fans probably don't know, but it's a very kind of it's an open atmosphere. The players are coming and going, and you kind of like, you're not hidden from them. So I didn't really realize that I would just be standing there while, all of a sudden Austin Matthews is walking into the game. But Ryan Reeves showed up wearing like a pink suit, looking great, frankly, but it was a hot pink suit. It was really nice. He's a massive human being. Like it's been a while since I've been kind of in a room with him, just because he's been in the Western Conference. I haven't really seen him in a while, and it's just daunting. And so for Arbor Xhekaj to take that guy and just decide to like bulldoze him into the net, which doesn't mean he won the fight or anything. It's a feat of strength. It's like it's like the Festivus thing where you have your feats of strength. Well, Arbor Xhekaj had one where he had a feat of strength pushing Ryan Reeves over that net. It was impressive.
Yeah.
So,
hey, but let's go.
It's good for Arbor Xhekaj's own. I think you talked about that yesterday, where he's talking. He needed that boost of confidence, and now he has it, and now he knows that everything's fine, the shoulder's fine, that he can.
Well, that's it. When he pushed Reeves onto the net and using all of his strengths, that's when he basically said, "It enabled me to test my shoulder, and I'm good to go. I'm fine." So that's a good thing. But we started by talking, or earlier we mentioned the Kirby Dach line as being probably the biggest positive of that game, one of the most significant elements. All three guys on that line look good, but I think. I think by now, people who've listened to us in the past, all of the last season, and I know that you're thinking like that, we have a sort of a positive prejudice towards Kirby Dach, and we see the potential, and we envision great things from him. But I think that even more than Dach, his two wingers really stood out on Wednesday night. Alex Newhook could not have dreamt of a better way to start his Canadiens career, at least from an individual perspective. And Juraj Slafkovsky, after building on a very, very good or an increasingly good training camp, came out and had the sort of a game that, man, if he can play like that the whole year, if that's how he starts the season, that's super exciting for what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's we Marty talks so much about his touches. Well, he had a lot of touches.
He did.
He had a lot of touches. And color me shocked that Max Domi, who turned the puck over in his own end, leading to a goal. Juraj Slafkovsky deserves credit for creating that turnover, but that was pretty vintage Max Domi in that situation. But anyhow, it's you're right. I mean, but I think it's good because it was a really good game, excellent game even, but it's not as if he made all sorts of incredible plays. Like, he just played the game well. Yeah. He didn't, the pass to Newhook on the first goal was obviously a great play. But, I would argue that, that's equal parts Dach, equal parts Slafkovsky. I mean, Slafkovsky had the poise to make that pass, but
he made the hit back in his own end.
Yes, he did.
And skated full tilt.
But that's what I'm talking about.
To catch up with his teammates, and was right there at the right time.
Yeah, and didn't panic and created his own passing lane to send it over to New. All of it good. Yeah. But watching, like I was telling someone, I think in the second intermission, I'm like, this might be the best game Slafkovsky's ever played. They're like, oh, that's a pretty low bar. And I was like, yeah, maybe. It might be a pretty low bar, but it's something that he had a lot of trouble doing, like just having a game where he wasn't trying to do anything spectacular. And he didn't even really try to do anything spectacular. He was just playing the game. And
moving his feet
and being in the right spots and just being a part of the game and not looking like he's following the game or chasing the game or just being behind in the game. So that's what's encouraging to me, is that at some point, if he keeps doing that, he will get those games where he does spectacular things, where he does impose his will on the game. He didn't really impose his will on this game. He just played it well. And that's a great first step, And so and it's funny that, at some point he was getting asked over and over again about how well he played. And I think after a while he was kind of like, okay, guys, I mean, it's like I think at one point he said, I think I still know how to play hockey.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, well, no one said you didn't know how to play hockey. Is that, did you feel like you didn't know how to play hockey? Like, he's taking like a big mental leap here, but he keeps making references to last season being a lot worse than any of us think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in his own mind, it was a lot worse than any of us think it was. But so
Well,
I think
it goes back to the fact that he asks a lot of himself too, So
exactly.
the
So
pressure we spoke about it the previous episode, the pressure he puts on himself, etc.
Yeah. So to start the season this way, and and the more that he can put that pressure behind him, it'll be interesting to see how he performs without that, because we've never seen it. He might not have. Maybe he's never seen it. I don't know, but I think there were times in his life when he's played without pressure and probably performed pretty well. So let's see. Let's see if it lasts another game.
Yeah, and I mean, I suspect that Alex Newhook sooner rather than later will end up being at center. But this is the one line that if Martin Saint-Louis was tempted to bring the blender out after one game and continue his experiments from training camp. Judging from that game in Toronto, that's the one line that I wouldn't touch. So
yeah. Do you think he'll wind up at center? Really?
Well, later, yeah. I think it's possible.
Like as a permanent position, or just he'll wind up there out of circumstance?
I think I expect to see him at center unless it clicks so well on that line that you just can't move him. I think that there should be a time between now and Dvorak coming back where he might see some action at center. Mm-hmm. And depending after that, what happens at the center line position. I mean, he's signed for 4 years. I don't expect Christian Dvorak to be in Montreal for 4 years, but they might want to try Sean Monahan on the wing, and in that case, until Dvorak is back,
I barely expect Christian Dvorak to be here for 4 months.
Yeah, well, you know what? I sat down with Kent Hughes earlier this week, and he mentioned Dvorak, saying that when Dvorak will be back, we're sure to have 3 very good lines. So not necessarily because of Dvorak himself, but he probably hints at what he's able to.
How the chairs are rearranged as a result.
Yes, and how he can move Monahan probably higher up in the lineup. So it creates a domino effect, creating probably a better third line than what we've seen so far. So, but in any case, that line, all 3 guys, they were really good. It's exciting to see, and it gives really the Canadians for the time being a true second line, and it doesn't give the burden of proof strictly on Caulfield and Suzuki to provide some offense, because they'll be able to do some. They'll be able to create some damage, and Duck and Slavkovsky, maybe the Duck, on the road might be more of an issue for him on draws, but in terms of size, in terms of style of play, I think that those guys could really be great contributors on the road too.
Well, yeah, I mean, they just did it on the road. So, I mean, and Doc wasn't so bad. He was, 3 for 7 in the faceoff circle, but I really think, I mean, I'm super high on Kirby Dach this season. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm really, really high on him, because I think we forgot a bit because of how he finished the season injured, but there was a period last year, I did forget about it until I saw him kind of go after, who was it that hit Slav from behind in Ottawa? I forget who it was, but Doc came right in and
Ridley Gregg.
Yeah, right. And so it reminded me of the period of time last season where Kirby Dach all of a sudden decided to get mean and started hitting people. Mm-hmm. And I remember I talked to Arbor Jackai about it at the time. I was like, have you noticed that Kirby Dach is getting like mean? He's like, yeah, I have noticed. I mean, how could you not notice? I was like, is it me, or is what happened? Like, what happened? Like, where did this come from? Because he was not a physical player at all.
No.
Over the first 20, 25 games of the season. And then all of a sudden he did start doing that. and like a whole other, and it unlocked like all these other things in his game. Like it just he became such a different player. And not like he was running around in Toronto and hitting everything that moved, but you see him physically using his body in effective ways, knowing that he's probably stronger than the guy he's going up against.
Yeah.
And he's definitely bigger than the guy he's going up against. And at that version of Kirby Dach, if we have that, if the Canadiens have that from the start of the season, as opposed to 25 games in, then that's a whole different Kirby Dach.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like, you combine all the good things we saw from him at the beginning of last season, you know, the transition ability, kind of the ranginess, the takeaways. I mean, you know, and we didn't even see that really in Toronto, but his ability to swipe pucks from people from great distances using his reach. And then you add all that to kind of a gnarly, you know, grumpy center who's big and strong. You have the makings of a pretty good center. And yeah. I don't know about you, but it's only one game, and I'm not only judging it on one game, but I'm just judging it on everything that's involved. Like, it's a tight race for me. Like, who has the higher ceiling between him and Nick Suzuki?
Well, yeah,
I'm starting to lean him.
It's a question of potential. It's got nothing to do with that first game. It's who he is as a player and what he's capable of doing.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because Suzuki's 24. He might be closer to the player that he's going to be. And I don't think that Suzuki will necessarily be evaluated based on the number of points that he puts up in the season. And for that reason, I mean, I think that Dach, sky's the limit with him. He might never reach Suzuki's point totals, but he's certainly capable of doing so, and he's capable of going further than that. So, because ultimately, I think just because of the physical ability that he's got to dominate the game, owning his body and owning the ice, because of that, this has always been very precious in hockey. And now that he understands it and integrates it to his game, as you said so well, it unlocks other parts of his game. And now that he's figuring this out, I think it's one of the reasons why we hear so often, oh, you know, with the bigger guys, it takes more time. Yeah. Because that's that part of saying, okay, now I'm fully grown. Now I'm into my body, and look at that. It's like, you know, it's like when Spider-Man discovered his superpower and started having fun with them.
Yeah.
Well, a bigger guy who's talented in the hockey, that's what happens too. And I think that's what we're starting to see with Kirby Dach.
Yeah.
So
imagine Juraj Slafkovsky at 22.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I mean, that could be quite something. Yeah. So, you know, it's exciting. And you were mentioning,
one thing I want to ask you about, to see if you agree with me or not, because I'm watching that game, and the Nick Suzuki line and the Austin Matthews line at 5-on-5 was zeros in terms of goals. Mm-hmm. It was 0-0. They tied. But, you know, there was definitely ebbs and flows to that game. There were definitely, you know, sections, you know, that 16-0 shot difference after the disallowed goal. And so I'm watching Nick Suzuki at times, you know, and it's a load. It's a handful to play against that line. And I'm thinking, how's he supposed to produce offense in this situation? Like, especially during that stretch, you know, where you're just hanging on for dear life. You're just trying to make sure that this guy does not turn the game in their favor. You just want him to not score.
They're not the same. Yeah, okay, sorry, I want to interrupt you.
I mean, but in terms of, if that's what he's going to be asked to do,
yeah,
like, is it fair for us to be wondering, because I'm wondering, I think the whole city, the whole fan base is wondering, you know, what his offensive ceiling is. He's been asked, can you be a point-a-game player? I think he knows that he's reached a point in his career where he kind of has to put his foot in the, you know, draw his line in the sand, or whatever cliche you want to use, and just be like, this is the player I am. But in this division, if you're facing the top guys every night, the top guys are top.
Yeah.
Barkov in Florida, Point or Stamkos in Tampa, Pasternak line in Boston. It's difficult. And is Nick Suzuki going to be able to reach his offensive ceiling if he has to do this? Do you think? I think it might be a hindrance to him, and I'm wondering if I'm overreacting. So what do you think?
It's not a hindrance, but I think they're quite aware of that, and that they're hoping that a stronger third line, a stronger fourth line, overall a better supporting cast will free him up from some of those responsibilities. Mm-hmm. When you say how is he supposed to provide offense in situations like that? Well, don't you think that Tomas Plekanec asked himself that question for years? And then Philippe Danault after that? It's been the same old thing with the first line center of the Montreal Canadiens for the longest time. It's because once you're asked to cover and face the NHL, the top stars,
that's asked of every first line center, not just of the Montreal Canadiens.
I know, but overall, they haven't had an Austin Matthews, they haven't had a Connor McDavid. Their first line centers have been,
So my question is: Nick Suzuki going to be Tomas Plekanec?
No. He's
wears
already
the same
better.
number, for crying out loud.
No, he's better, but there's a risk that there might be a conundrum come playoff time one day it's going to happen, that if the team is not better and it keeps relying on him like that, come playoff time, don't look for his offense. I think that's what's going to happen. But by then, if they are a playoff team, it's because they will have a lot more diversity to their offense, and they'll have a better supporting cast, and then you'll be able to have more favorable matchups. And in all that, probably that Cole Caulfield will be able to produce more too. Because as long as he's attached, I could see Suzuki, even though he's got those mandates, he's got those assignments, and he might not go to the end of his potential. He might turn a career that offensively could look like Jonathan Toews. Mm-hmm. But the guy next to him, Cole Caulfield, if he's got that sort of assignments, it's not the ideal deployment for him. Because no. So
I mean, when they were trying to hold on to that lead, I mean, Monahan was on the ice with Suzuki and Anderson, and I forget who it was, but Slav wasn't on the ice with Doc and Newhook either. I think it was Pearson actually who took his spot. So no. During that stretch where there was when the lead came down to one goal, and there's nothing wrong with that, but Marty, kept sort of his less defensively responsible players on the bench, which is normal. But I think those are the thoughts that were going through my head as I was watching that game, because I really did think going into the game that Marty was going to try and get him away from that to allow him. And, he mentioned after the game, I tried to get him some offensive zone faceoffs, but that didn't really fit with the flow of the game. And ultimately he just kind of let it ride. Cause I think his vibe on this team is going to, let's just roll four lines. Let's come at them in waves. That's the identity. That's going to be I think in his mind, he's been asked multiple times, what's the identity of this team? I think that's going to be the identity of this team. It's just that we come at you in waves.
Yeah.
1 through 4, we can come at you. But if that means Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, and whoever's playing with them, whether it's Josh Anderson, whoever, that they're just consistently going to get the most difficult matchup on the night, then maybe the offensive expectations need to reflect that.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I think we've talked plenty about the game that's been. I think that we should look ahead. But one thing that I wanted to mention, and it's probably true, even though we use that game in Toronto as an excuse to talk about it. But special teams, how big of an issue do you think is going to continue to be this season?
I thought the power play was fine. I didn't think it was that bad. It didn't. Listen, that 4-on-3 was terrible, but I thought, I remember, I think on the first power play, They lost the faceoff, so Leafs iced the puck. I was like, oh, well, there goes that power play. It's the end of that power play, and it wasn't. They got back in the zone. They were able to establish their presence. It's baby steps with this thing, and the bar's low, but the
bar is very low.
They created. They worked the puck around. They created some chances. The 5-on-4. I mean, the 4-on-3 is a whole other matter that I think is a carryover from last season, where they just took it so slowly. They had so much time. They're like, let's just work the puck around slowly. Let's all be standing still. Game's on the line. It's overtime. We have a 4-on-3, and they just looked like they had the least amount of urgency they could possibly have. And the result showed it. And we saw it countless times last season, where if there was a long 5-on-3 or a 4-on-3 in overtime or whatever, that they approached it the same way. So that's an adjustment that clearly needs to be made. But a 5-on-4, I didn't think they were that bad. And honestly, we forget that they didn't start the season with Mike Matheson last year. Having Mike Matheson from the start of the season makes a difference. That guy's a crafty player.
Yeah. And surely, I mean, it's going to be Montreal is the first stop in his career where he gets first PP. In Florida, he didn't have it, and Pittsburgh obviously didn't either because of Chris Letang. So it's a great opportunity for him. And I like to see him plenty on the PP. On the PK, not so much. I mean, this is another guy they need to manage his minutes. But speaking of the PP, the PK, sorry, it's tough to start the season against the Toronto Maple Leafs.
I'm not judging them for succumbing to the Maple Leafs power play. The problem is the Canadians taking numerous penalties over and over again and sending them out there. But yeah, I don't know what to make of. I'm not ready to draw any conclusions on the penalty kill just yet.
No, and they're changing stuff. I mean, they used to have a 1-1-2 last year, and they're using a diamond formation.
Yeah,
that way they want, because it makes the switches easier. There's going to be less switches actually that way. They want to use the diamond formation to put more pressure on the guys on the flanks. Of course, against Nylander and Matthews, it didn't work all that well. They both scored, but in theory, that's what they're trying to do. And having like just that D obviously close to the goalie who's going to be there. Just basically, he's going to defend as if it was a perpetual 2-on-1 with the guy in the bumper and the guy going for the back door. But I think it's a good idea, because if those guys, especially young defensemen, a younger team in general, they need to be on the same page. They need to understand what they're doing. Whatever they're doing, they need to be in sync. And if you go for the structure that is a bit easier to grasp and that needs less communication. Do you remember back in the Dom Ducharme days where their PK was so complicated that's one of the things that got Jeff Petrie so upset? Because the switches were constant, and what do we do in this situation? And they were like, they were completely lost at some point. So they got to go easy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and when you're instituting a new system on the penalty kill, it takes time as well. That has to become second nature, so that'll take some time. But speaking of the penalty kill, he didn't play a lot on it, but Jonathan Kovacevic played more than 20 minutes in that game.
Yeah, well, Jack Guy was not there for a while.
Jack Guy was not there. I understand that, but still, I just find it. I mean, Jack Guy's but I thought he looked good. I thought
he had a sneaky good training camp. That guy, he's a low event guy, and you need that sometimes on your third pairing. You need a guy who's.
But he's top 4 right now. That's the thing.
Yeah, you're right.
He's top 4. And so,
I don't know how long that's going to last, but it's
quite an assignment for him, and it's interesting to me. I mean, he didn't listen. He's paired with Gouli. It's there should have been some. there's going to be some growing pains, I guess, with that pairing. You know, there's no veteran anchor on that pairing, but I find it to be an interesting. Marty speaks so highly of him. Like, you really get the sense that he likes this guy.
Yeah. How can you?
I find that
He's
interesting.
such a
No,
good
of course. As a person, he's easy to like, but as a player, you know, he is. You know, he's kind of a meat and potatoes defenseman. Like, he's huge and he can move and he's smart, but top four guy. It just makes me think of Brett Kulak when we used to always kind of joke with Brett Kulak about being top four defenseman. You know, I'm Brett Kulak, top 4D. It's like,
thank goodness he did not hear us when we were on the press box making fun like that. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't making fun. That was his goal. That's what he said that to, you know. And so every time he was in the top four, we would say that because he mentioned that, you know, I always wanted to be a top 4D. Yeah. So whenever he happened to be on the second pair, we would look at each other on the press box. Oh, Brett Kulak, top 4D. Yeah. So Jonathan Kovacevic right now, top 4D. So it's.
But you know, when Kulak was at his best, you would not question why he was a top 4D. But the worst of Brett Kulak, he would end up on the press box next to us. So he had such highs and lows in his game, whereas Kovacevic, who's a different player entirely, he's super steady, and that's something that a coach will always like. You know, even if your highest is maybe not super high, if one game to the next, you know what to expect from the guy, the coach will like you. And the other thing is, because he's a smart guy, he seems to me like the sort of guy who takes what he's being taught and doesn't repeat the same mistakes over and over. So slowly, incrementally, he's getting better that way. So it's subtle because he's never going to be a flashy player. He's never going to put up a ton of points. But he's gone, since the beginning of last year, he's progressively become more reliable.
Yeah, and, you know, out of that whole group of Barron, Harris, and him, basically, you know, I didn't think that he would be the guy to emerge as the top four guy. So let's see how long that lasts. One thing I would like to talk to you, actually. You mentioned your chat with Ken Hughes.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you haven't read what Marc-Antoine wrote, what his colleague Alexandre Gascon wrote, I think I would highly recommend going to do that. But I wanted to get just kind of your overall, you know, I want a vibe check on Ken Hughes. Because you mentioned, when Christian Dvorak's back, we're going to have 3 good lines. You know, this is something that a GM of a team that hopes to win games would say. You know, a GM of a team that thinks his team is competing for something would say. Which is, Ken Hughes has said publicly many times, you know, the days of losing on purpose are over. We want to win games. All that, great, you know. But
yeah,
I think Ken Hughes is a pragmatic, realistic person as well, and that there are still some things that need to be done on this team in order to compete in this division. He's very, very aware of it. So what was your vibe in terms of his balance between those two things? The reality that they still need to add pieces to this team versus this notion that from now on, this team is focused solely on winning games, and that we need to take steps and win some games.
Well, my impression is that he's not focused at all on winning X number of games. That's not, when he spoke about Dvorak, it was an answer to a question that I asked him about, precisely about Suzuki's responsibilities, and at some point, to which extent do you just stretch the elastic too much? And you ask too much of a guy he might be your best player, your best overall player, but at some point, you know, don't you want to give him some help? So that's how Dvorak was brought up. And I think that what he pictures also is how can we better help our young players? Chris, for Kent Hughes, I think that the biggest priority, you know, how we've been talking a lot about progression since the golf tournament, but for him, it's going to be a lot about individual development. I think that he sees the group development as what Martin's saying we can do on a day-to-day basis, and organically you improve all your players, you put them together, the group is going to get better. But it's not the group that's going to get better, hence players individually are going to get better. For him, it's about making sure that the best players on the team take a step. So what can we do to make sure that Suzuki gets better, Cole Caulfield, Doc, Slavkovsky, et cetera, et cetera. So the onus is placed on that. And it's true at every level of the organization. It's true for the guys that they chose to keep on the team. It's true for those that they chose to return to Laval at the end of camp, whether it's Norlander or Heinemann. But for me, that's what's really struck me. Or yeah,
just kidding.
Oh, you'll get better in Laval. Yeah, so he's, for example, I mean, or even sending back Reinbacher to Switzerland. They truly believe that he's going to get better there because they trust the development system in Cloton. They said, well, he thrived over there last year or so. Why would we, if it's not broken, why fix it? We bring him to Laval. He's going to be fighting for minutes with Logan Mailloux. And that's me extending his thought here. But if they have also a plan for Logan Mailloux, where he needs to play X number of minutes with Laval, well, then they're competing one against the other, and they should not, because they have the luxury where they can. They also have
AHL veterans in Laval who also need to play, and they also want to win games in Laval. Like there's a lot going on in Laval. It.
Yeah. So overall, I don't think that there's the whole we want to get better and win games, and we're not going to we're not going to get in there with an attitude that we're going to lose. I think it's really a byproduct of the fact that last season there was a separation between management and the locker room, where whether it was the players or the coaches, and to that extent, because I mean, Hughes secretly and sometimes not so secretly was hoping that the Canadians would win. Remember that press conference when he said, "Well, we can win, but not too much."
Yeah, to a certain point.
Only to a certain point. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
the famous morning skate before the game against the Panthers, Marty pointing up in the stands. You see him? He wants you to win tonight, as opposed to all the other nights. I don't think that he said that, but
that's what it meant.
Was pretty clear. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, I think that by saying that, he was saying, no more of this, and it's also he was telling this to us, but I think he must have sent the message to the players that this discomfort that might have been felt last season, it's not going to be there anymore. It's go out there, guys, win as much as you can, because our interest in a top 5 pick is not going to be what it was last season. Right. So I think it's for that.
I have another question. Just so our listeners know, we actually didn't plan this. I didn't tell Marc-Antoine I'm going to grill him about his interview with Ken Hughes, but I don't want you to reveal how the sausage was made necessarily. But when Ken Hughes came out and acknowledged the need to add high-end talent, talent de pointe, or whatever, game-breaking talent.
Yeah.
Did he volunteer that? Did you guys coax it out of him? Like, how did that come up?
Well, it's a line of questioning that my colleague Alexandre Gascon brought forward, because I think it's very topical and it's something that everybody's.
It's topical. It's what every fan is worried about.
That's what everybody's feeling. Yeah,
yeah.
So I think that, and he played ball because he did not throw anybody under the bus. And he said that he's always looking for more talent. But there were a few nuggets there that I thought were very interesting, because he says, we always want to add high-end talent. Is it going to be through draft, through a trade? He says, we have a lot of draft capital. If we wanted to trade a first-round pick, second-round pick, third-round pick, fourth-round pick in 2025 to acquire a top player, well, we would still have a first, a second, a third, and a fourth.
Yes,
so
exactly.
so they've come to a point where they've got some assets, and also how the team is going to approach free agency in the future was also a very I think interesting thing. And it was a bit of an insight into his belief that competitive windows exist. And, people might say, well, of course it exists. But let's not forget that
his predecessor.
No, he did not believe in that. On more than one occasion, Marc Bergevin said that he did not believe in competitive windows. And wasn't it when we sat down with him in Carolina?
Yeah.
Yeah. My jaw dropped that day. That he said, oh, no.
That was my first time I felt like, this guy's he's not balanced. there's something off kilter about this guy, because his insistence that there's no competitive windows. I was like, so do you think you could build a competitive team and it will perpetually remain competitive till the end of time? Like you're gonna build a Stanley Cup contender and it will remain a Stanley Cup contender. There will be no window closing. There will be no window opening. It's just like, so anyhow. Yeah.
Yeah. So in any case,
I think we have a more realistic guy running the team right now. Yeah,
for sure. So Kent Hughes said, if you go on the market, on UFA market, you're going to get some 27 to 29-year-old guys that you need to sign long term. And it's the first few years of their deal that's meant to really pay off, because otherwise they're going to be declining assets towards the end. So it needs to pay off right away when the team is ready for it and the team needs it. So Hughes admitted, well, we're probably not in the market for those long signings yet. So he understands that in terms of the competitive window, he might want to add some high-end talent, but signing a superstar or whatever it may be, the time might not just be right yet. Although,
so if a certain Swedish winger ever hit the market,
I know
a guy who could almost single-handedly fix the power play.
Yeah.
You don't think he would dive in on that?
Yeah. You know what?
Well, I'm actually asking you the question.
It feels so good to say that Nylander would look good in a Canadiens uniform on SDPN. It makes me giggle.
That is funny. Yeah. But I mean, it's honestly like, I don't know. I honestly don't know if it's a good time for the Canadiens. Like, based on what everything you just said that Ken Hughes told you guys makes total sense. And perhaps the thing is that players like that don't hit the market all that often. At that age, it's everything about what's going on there. I'm still not convinced he's going to hit the market. Let's just be clear. Like, I'm still not convinced he's going to leave Toronto. And if he does, I'm not convinced he would want to leave Toronto just to come to Montreal, other than if he just wants to really spite Toronto. If his intent is to be like, screw you, Toronto, I'm going to go to the one place you don't want me to go to, but otherwise I don't see why he would. But anyhow, that's just an aside. But philosophically...
It's like when Burge approached Milan Lucic and Lucic was like, ish, I could never do that.
Or when he tried to trade Georges to Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Again, just a little off balance.
Yeah. But anyway, so Hughes, he believes in teams being in cycles, and there's something else he said that's interesting, is that other teams, when their window closes at the very beginning of the time where they start, dismantling and they know that they're going to rebuild, they're still good teams. It's just that they understand where they're at. They're still good teams. They still got good players. And sometimes it's players on those teams that can become the best targets.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, and you know what? Who I thought? I thought of Matthew Barzal at that time, because at some point Lou is going to retire in Long Island. His successor will say, "There's nothing to do there. We have to fix the whole thing."
Right.
And they're going to have to move that contract, and he'll still be young enough. So if he's the type of player that they like, he's the sort of player that, 2-3 years down the road could still be available.
That's interesting. I hadn't actually ever considered that. That's actually a really interesting point, that, just kind of picking, not the carcass, but I mean, kind of going at a team that's on the verge of rebuilding, but doing it before before the fire sale sign is open,
before they're completely stripped, because at the end they start assembling their team to sell the parts, year after year, like San Jose is going to do this year. They got a bunch of guys on 1-year deals, and they're going to trade them at the deadline.
But that's an interesting. So when you think about a window for the Canadians, I think it's very much tied to. Well, I'm not a genius for thinking this. This is obvious. I mean, it's going to be tied to entry level contracts, and in many ways, to me, if, for instance, Doc makes the progression that I think both you and I feel he could make, it's going to be tied to like his contract. If Newhook makes the kind of progression that maybe he will, it'll be tied to his contract, because they have these two bargain pieces right now.
Yeah.
Somewhat offset by, say, the Gallagher contract and a handful of others, but Gouli on entry level. And so it strikes me that in the NHL now, these windows arrive quicker than they should. For teams in Montreal's situation or Philadelphia situation or whoever's situation, when you're drafting high and you're adding these players. I mean, just look at Toronto, like how fast they had to get into win now mode. It didn't take long, and Matthews is already, how long has he been there? 7 years?
I think so. Something like that.
Yeah. So, but they've been in this win now mode for 4 of those years, 5 even. So it's really, this is what I find so interesting about the Canadian situation, is that they don't have a Matthews. Edmonton got into that situation because they had McDavid and Draisaitl. Toronto had Matthews and Marner. They had the center, and in Montreal, they're still trying to figure out who is the centerpiece of this project. And so, but they still have those young pieces. They still have, Caulfield's locked up, Suzuki's locked up. You have these two, which I think will be excellent contracts in Doc and Newhook. If when Slav's entry level expires, who knows what he's going to do in the next 2 seasons. But let's say by the end of next season, he is like a legitimate power forward guy.
Yeah.
He'll have to get paid. Kane Gouli, if he's looking like a top pairish defenseman at the end of his entry level, he's going to have to get paid. And so,
sure,
I just find in this landscape in the NHL, with this with the way contracts work now, back in the day, guys didn't get paid until they were 27, 28, if that.
Yeah, but you don't even have to look that far back. It seems like only 5 years ago, we used to hear that, a team needs to win with some of their most productive players on entry-level contracts. But now, young teams like Ottawa or Buffalo, they've signed all of their whole core for the next 5-6 years. All those guys are signed long-term. It's 5 guys, and they're entering the time when they're going to become competitive, and none of those guys that are part of their core is on their entry level deal. No. So it's a different landscape.
No, it's the second contracts. You need to build your team around second contracts. So you need to draft the right guys and then get them locked in. Not even to bargain contracts. Like we're talking about like Jake Sanderson, Stützle, Tkachuk.
You need Buffalo. Them to convince you.
Yeah. And then you have to double down on them. So like, who are the Canadians doubling down on?
Well, I think that Gouli is going to be their extent. Yeah, Gouli is going to be their Sanderson.
Right. So past him. I mean, I think, it's hard to say with Reinbacher. I have the impression that he will become another one of those guys that will come to Montreal eventually. He will play out his entry level, and at the end of his entry level, he will sign a long-term extension and get paid a lot of money. But it's just crazy to me that the window that Hughes is talking about, they have to foresee it now when they're so far from it. Like they're not even close to that window. Like it's not even on the horizon. It's on another continent, and they still have to start planning for it right now.
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't know if I brought it up in our previous episode, but when I chatted with Kent, he said he agreed with me when I said that their prospects on defense was really the biggest thing that they could build on. And I was mentioning, of course, Gouli's already here, and you could add maybe Jacky because he's as Nick Bogroff likes to say, he's a unicorn in what he does. But yeah, Reinbacher, you add Mayu, you add Lane Hudson, and maybe Adam Engstrom. They might, all those guys might not hit, but it's clearly there where you have the strongest talent pool. But those guys, apart from the first two, are not in the NHL yet. So by the time they have convinced the Canadians that they're long-term pieces, while Newhook and Duck will be done with their respective deals. And Suzuki and Caulfield will be in their prime, but they'll be in the middle of their long-term contract. So it's a forever evolving thing. And maybe that's why Burge was saying that I don't believe in windows, because you can never plan it in a way that things will fit. But if you want to accelerate it, you can accelerate it by saying, okay, well, if I have some good pieces, now what can I do to take the next step? And I'm going to find a guy that's going to make it so that we don't perpetually wait for the next thing.
Well, I think what you just talked about too is because on defense, it actually does line up perfectly, almost. I mean, Gouli will be the first guy to get signed. Reinbacher will be next. If everything works out and all these guys hit, you could have a succession of long-term contracts, but they would just all be on defense. That's what it'd be. And so and we haven't even talked about the goaltending, but if Jacob Fowler turns out or whatever, if one of these goalies turn out, then he would also be in that grouping of guys, which really would suggest that the guys we're looking at right now are kind of perhaps secondary elements of what will actually one day make the Canadians a powerful team.
Do you know who the Canadians don't have? Connor Bedard.
They don't have Connor Bedard. No.
But they'll see him. They'll see him on Saturday.
We'll see him on Saturday. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that game. I'm just going to watch him the whole game. I'm just going to. Well, I think the first 3 times Connor McDavid came to Montreal, whenever he was on the ice, I did not watch any other player. I just followed him. And that's what I'm going to do Saturday night. I'm going to watch Connor Bedard the whole time. See what he does.
I think it's great that the home opener is against this kid. I think it brings a whole new dimension to the game, as if you needed more already, because it's always a game that's very, very hyped. But man, it's just fun to watch. I mean, he's, and it's not just his shot is out of this world. I mean, I think that only Austin Matthews will probably be on par with that. But he's so elusive, and he's so there's so many elements to his game that makes him a treat to watch.
One thing I can guarantee you is that no one's going to be talking about Connor Bedard needing to get more touches.
No,
the word touches. The word touches doesn't really apply to Connor Bedard. I mean, he's already getting, just a ridiculous amount of shot attempts, let alone touches. I mean, he's just walked right into the NHL, and it's not a problem. So yeah, I'm excited, and it's I'm excited to watch him play. Chicago Blackhawks should be excited, and everything we've been talking about applies to the Chicago Blackhawks as well. But they have that guy.
They do. They do. But they need Korchinski to be good. They need Frank Nazar to eventually become a quality NHLer. They've got some pieces, Reichel, etc.
They could wind up with one of the big 3 this year.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's almost likely. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the lottery, but they're not a good team. I mean, unless Connor Bedard could single-handedly lift them to, fifth or sixth pick, like, I mean, it's, or maybe even better, higher than that. I don't know, but
No, it's just that it'll be hard to be as bad as San Jose this season, though.
Oh, of course, but I can see Anaheim taking a step. Yeah, there's a lot of guys. Columbus taking a step, Montreal taking a step. I mean, it's there's if they were to get one of the big three this year, one of Celebrini, Yzerman, or Demidov, then they're looking pretty formidable. They have like the makings of a very interesting core, and the advantage that they have is that they don't have they don't have these contracts lingering that they need to get rid of. Their decks are clean, and when you think about it, we've often wondered, like, why did they give up on Doc? And this isn't a justification for giving up on Doc. It's just a practical consideration where you just be like, well, he needs a new contract and it's not going to fit with all these other guys that we're going to be, so let's just get something for him, which winds up being Nazar.
Yeah.
And just, not saying he's a bad player. He's not a fit for us. He doesn't fit our window. And, who's to say they're wrong? I mean, but I find it just building a contending team. There's no one way to do it. I feel like a lot of people look at it and like, you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to do this. And there's no evidence showing that any NHL team has figured out the perfect way to do it. Edmonton still has not won a cup. They have the Connor Bedard, the previous Connor Bedard. They have him, and they've had him for a long time. And not only that, they have arguably the second best player. I mean, and so there's no set formula, but it's for sure easier for fans to look at what Chicago's done and is going to continue doing and say, well, this seems to be a formula. But the more I've thought about it, like the Canadians doubling down on defense is their strength. Who's to say that won't be a good formula?
It's an interesting approach because and dynamic players too. I mean, those guys are not just like big stay-at-home guys who will.
There's not a bunch of Ben Sherratts back there. Like
that's it. Everybody saw Mailloux over camp. I mean, he's pretty dynamic. On the offensive side of the puck, Reinbacher is going to be also an interesting puck mover and a smart guy, a smart 200-foot guy. Hudson played like 40 minutes the other night, and Vincent Lecavalier was super excited from what he saw because he went down there in Boston to watch him play.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
Engstrom's having a great season.
Man, defense their blue line's not going to be a problem. They might be young. This year might be an issue at times this year, but over time, this is their gem. That's where they're strong. The rest,
question
marks.
No, we'll see. I mean, it's not crazy in my eyes. It's just like to have like a group of defense that they could potentially have, let's say 3 years from now, that top to bottom are big, mobile, dynamic, puck handling. Like they have it all, other than Hudson, who's just not big. And so, all these guys have size, and it could just be just incredibly, incredibly dynamic defense group, which could make it so that maybe it's not the end of the world if you have like kind of a 4-line attack and that you don't have the big Connor Bedard type person up front, that the defense is so good and the defense contributes to the attack so much. Maybe you can get by without a Connor Bedard. But in the meantime, we get to watch Connor Bedard.
That's it.
Because it's admittedly fun to watch. And I think that's what upsets a lot of the fans too, is that they want to have that guy. They want to have Connor McDavid on their team so that
of course
you get to watch him 82 times a year. It's like
well, people in Montreal they love it. They will left players who put on a good show. That's why they've always loved PK Subban. They love Alex Kovalev. They love obviously Guy Lafleur. They want guys who put up a show.
They're also sick of having the goalie be their best player, which is not the case now. So I'm just be happy about that. Yeah. But for the longest time, the goalie was their best player. Was the Canadiens' best player, and I think a lot of fans are sick of that. But I think I'm not so sure that watching that young defense group is going to be boring. I don't think it will be. I think it'll be a lot of fun eventually because I'm fascinated as a team building approach. It's different, and I like things that are different. I'm very curious to see if it works out.
Yeah, and Martin Saint Louis talks a lot about positionless hockey. Mm-hmm. That's the trend. That's where hockey is going. Well, if you have defensemen like that,
Wayne Hudson was born to play positionless hockey.
Jeez,
literally, he came out the womb preaching the virtues of positionless hockey.
Yeah. So, all right, let's wrap this up, Arpin. I hope everybody enjoyed the podcast today. Let us remind you that you can send us your questions because we're going to do a mailbag every Monday. So starting this Monday. So you can send us your questions. You can email us at basuandgodin@gmail.com. Or you can just drop a question or a comment on our Twitter handle, on our Twitter account, which is Basu and Godin. And obviously, you can read Arpin in The Athletic, and you can read me on radiocanada.ca. And that's it, man.
We'll be back Monday. We'll see how the Connor Bedard caravan rolls through Montreal. And we'll I think we're going to talk about it on Monday probably, just his first experience with the Montreal media. We're gonna interact with him for the first time. But until then, have a nice weekend. Enjoy the games, and we'll talk to you on Monday.
Bye-bye, everybody.